When you picture a courtroom, you see two main figures, right? The lawyer and the judge. But here's something most of us don't really think about. They are playing by two completely different sets of ethical rules. It's like one is carrying a sword and the other is holding a set of scales. So, in this explainer, we're going to break down these two fascinating and sometimes conflicting codes of conduct that really shape how justice works in India. All right, here's what we've got on tap. We'll kick things off by looking at the two very different hats that advocates and judges wear. Then we'll get into the tricky situations they face, things like recusal and the brand new challenges that come with live streaming courtrooms. And finally, we'll see what happens when all these principles get pushed to their absolute limit. So first up, what's the fundamental difference between an advocate and a judge? Well, it all boils down to what they're there to do. They really are wearing two completely different hats, and each one comes with its own heavy set of rules and responsibilities. And this right here, this just lays it out perfectly. The advocate carries the sword, their main job, to fight, and fight fearlessly for their client. But the judge? The judge holds the scales. They've taken an oath to be totally impartial, to weigh the evidence and the law without any bias whatsoever. So, you see, one represents a person, while the other represents justice itself. Okay, let's start with the advocate. Now, their job is not some kind of free-for-all. Oh no. Their conduct is actually laid out in great detail by the Bar Council of India, all under the Advocates Act of 1961. What these rules show us is that an advocate is so much more than just a hired gun for a client. They're an officer of the court. And that means they're in a constant, delicate balancing act. They have to fight passionately for their client, for sure. But they also have to be respectful to the judge and the court. And they can never, I mean never, appear before a judge who's a relative. That's to avoid even the slightest perception of a conflict of interest. It's really this tension, this pull between aggressive advocacy and a deep duty to the system of justice that truly defines their role. But what happens when that duty to your client slams right into a much higher moral calling? Well, the story of one of India's most legendary lawyers, Nani Palkhiwala, during a true moment of national crisis, gives us an incredibly powerful answer. Think about this timeline. In just a couple of weeks, a massive legal case just snowballed into a constitutional crisis for the entire country. And Palkhiwala, who had just pulled off a partial victory for his client, the Prime Minister herself, was suddenly staring at an impossible choice. A choice between his professional duty and his own conscience. Now, here's the really crucial part. Palkhiwala actually still believed in the legal strength of Indira Gandhi's case. But the government declaring an emergency, suspending democracy itself, that was a line in the sand he just could not cross. So he chose his lifelong values, the values of the Constitution, over his professional duty to his client. And in doing so, he set a standard for legal ethics in India that echoes to this day. Palkhiwala's decision really drives home that an advocate's ultimate loyalty is to a higher moral code. So now, let's flip over to the other side of the courtroom. A judge's ethical compass is also guided by a really powerful set of principles, what you might call the global gold standard for how judges should behave. These are the Bangalore Principles of Judicial Conduct, and they've been adopted by the United Nations. What made them so groundbreaking was that they created a universal framework, a common ethical language for judges all over the world. They focus on these 6 core values, everything from independence to integrity. And the code isn't just about what a judge does on the bench, it covers their whole life, to make absolutely sure that justice isn't only done, but that it's seen to be done by any reasonable person looking in. And that idea that justice must be seen to be done brings us to a really fascinating and tricky part of a judge's job, recusal. This is when a judge decides to step away from a case to avoid any hint of bias, and it puts that principle of impartiality to a very, very public test. This whole idea is built on an ancient Latin phrase, nemo, judex, in causa sua. It's really the bedrock of being an impartial judge. It means that if a judge has any personal or financial connection to a case, no matter how tiny, they have to step aside. Period. And here's where the debate really heats up. In India, there aren't any formal written-down rules for recusal. It's basically left up to the individual judge's discretion. And this has created a huge ethical tug-of-war between a judge's right to step away quietly and the public's right to know exactly why. This table kind of lays out the whole conflict. On one side, being transparent builds public trust. It totally lines up with the Bangalore principle of propriety. But on the other side, judges worry that if they give reasons, it might encourage lawyers to make baseless accusations just to try and get a judge they think will be more favorable, a practice called bench shopping. It's a classic standoff between accountability and protecting the institution. And this whole debate about transparency, well, it's now crashing head-on into modern technology because courtrooms across India are starting to live stream their proceedings. This is a brand new test for these very old ethical principles. Now, the idea behind live streaming was fantastic, right? To pull back the curtain on the courts and let people see justice in action. But it turns out it's a real double-edged sword, and it's created what some people are now calling a content tornado. And you better believe there's a huge financial incentive fueling this tornado. Social media creators can earn up to 6 lakh rupees from a single viral clip from a courtroom, a clip that gets about 1.5 million views. All of a sudden, justice is being turned into a commodity. And the fallout from this is pretty serious. Complex legal debates get sliced and diced into sensational clickbait. A lawyer getting a dressing down from a judge, if taken out of context, can wreck a professional reputation that took decades to build. The entire solemn atmosphere of the court just disappears, and it becomes more like a circus. And in that circus, public opinion, not the actual evidence, can start to shape the story, which is a massive threat to the idea that everyone is innocent until proven guilty. So we've seen lawyers dealing with constitutional crises, judges dealing with a digital age. What's the one thing that holds all of this together? What's the ultimate principle for both the sword and the scales? What is the real price of integrity? Nani Palkhiwala had a name for it: constitutional morality. He also called it dharma, which is this broader idea of righteous duty that goes way beyond just following the black and white text of the law. It's that inner compass that has to guide every lawyer's argument and every judge's ruling. His point was powerful. If that moral compass dies in people, no constitution, no law on paper can save the system. And that brings us to the big, final question we're left with. As technology keeps blurring the lines between the actual courtroom and the court of public opinion, the challenge facing India's legal system is just immense. How does it find the balance between the incredible promise of open justice and the very real dangers of turning it all into a public spectacle? The answer to that is going to define the future of integrity for both the sword and the scales.